Don't take it, don't. Don't take it, don't. Don't take it, don't. Don't take it, don't.
Well, friends, welcome. We're delighted to have you all with us, and I want to welcome Rick Tarnas and Rachel Lang. Rachel Lang is a friend and colleague who's been guiding me into my new exploration of astrology. She's an astrologer and a psychic and very gifted and accomplished. We've done a spiritual biography with her, a session on her work, a session with her and Yvonne Tarnas, who's Rick's wife and is a Jungian therapist as well as an astrologer. Rachel and Yvonne work together on relationship work specifically. And Rick Tarnas is an extraordinarily gifted colleague. It turns out that one of the very first New School conversations we did was with Rick, and it was on Cosmos and Psyche. So, Rick, it's a joy to have you back, and welcome back. And Rachel, welcome back as well.
Thanks so much, Michael. It's so great to be here with you both.
Wonderful.
Thank you. Likewise. Yeah, it's been a few years since we've had our last conversation, but as I was saying to you just beforehand, I follow what you do, and I remember very much enjoying the conversation you had with Robert Bellinette when he probably just a year or two before he passed away.
That's correct. Yeah, and it was a wonderful conversation. Rick, let me introduce you a bit. You're the founding director of the graduate program in philosophy, cosmology, and consciousness at the California Institute of Integral Studies in San Francisco. You had a Jesuit education, and at Harvard, you studied Western intellectual and cultural history. And then you lived and worked at Esalen in Big Sur for 10 years, studying with Stanislav Grof, Joseph Campbell, Gregory Bateson, Houston Smith, and James Hillman. You later serving as Esalen's Director of Programs and Education. You got your PhD from Saybrook in 1976 with a dissertation on LSD psychotherapy, psychoanalysis, and spiritual transformation. From 1980 to 1990, you wrote the extraordinary book, The Passion of the Western Mind, a narrative of the history of Western thought from ancient Greeks to postmodern times. And then in 2006, you published the equally extraordinary and even more groundbreaking Cosmos and Psyche, which received the Book of the Year prize from our friend David Lorimer at the Scientific and Medical Network in the UK. You're the former president of the International Transpersonal Association. You're on the board of the Jung Institute in San Francisco. And in addition to teaching at the California Institute of Integral Studies, you lecture frequently at Pacifica Graduate Institute and give many lectures in the US and abroad. And so with that introduction, I'd love to plunge most directly into the central question before us, which is, we are living in a period of immense transformation. At Commonweal, we speak of living in the global polycrisis of environmental, social, technological, financial, economic disruptions. These global stressors are interacting with increasing force and speed, creating future shocks of ever greater intensity. And the question of how we navigate this is fundamental and profound, not only for us collectively as a civilization, but it comes down to simple things like, what is our narrative for ourselves, or what do we say to our children about what we are going through? How do we live in this time in the most creative possible way? So, for the mainstream world to ask if astrology has something to contribute to this is essentially a non-starter. But for those of us who live at the interface between the archetypal world and the mainstream world, what Parker Palmer calls the tragic gap between what is and what we would hope for, the question of what astrology offers is quite fundamental. It's something I've been exploring with Rachel, who I am so grateful is with us today. But from your perspective, from the astrological perspective as you understand it, how do you understand what we're going through?
Well, huge, easy question to start off with here. First of all, I think in many ways, the crisis that we're going through, or polycrisis, as you rightly described it, with so many different facets and dimensions to it, all of which are kind of converging in the classic perfect storm kind of way. It also could be seen as being informed at a very deep level by a crisis of worldview, a crisis of vision, and not just one of technical fixes that aren't being implemented. Certainly, social, political, economic forces are all at work. Ecological, geological, biological factors are intensely in motion. And at the same time, one can see that informing all these and kind of driving these, because of the tremendous power of Homo sapiens, technologically empowered in an industrial civilization on our precious planet, because of that singular empowerment of one species, the basic structures of reality and the assumptions that inform how our species, and particularly the most powerful members of the species, act towards the rest of the world, towards the rest of the Earth community, and conceive of the human being in relationship to the animate Earth or to the universe. All these are deeply, all those assumptions and principles that inform our actions are, I think, affecting what's happening. So if we can, the three of us here don't have our fingers on the levers of power directly the way somebody in a very powerful multinational corporation boardroom might be, political administrations at the White House or elsewhere. We don't have that kind of power direct, but we all play a role in kind of rippling out into the world our vision, our understanding of the world. And I think the archetypal cosmos that is seen as being ensouled, as having intelligence, as being meaningful through and through, and also as having some relevance to this moving Earth and every individual and moment of time that transpires on this Earth. To have a vision of the cosmos that involves a more embedded participatory relationship between the human being and the ensouled, intelligent cosmos is a radical shift from the worldview that has basically dominated the mainstream modern mind over the last several hundred years, which is one of a kind of top-down. The human being is seen as being the most, and perhaps by some even as the only conscious, intelligent, purposeful being, the one who has the highest capacities in the entire known universe for moral and spiritual aspiration and for intellectual discernment and so forth. If your species thinks that it's the most, the summum bonum, the absolute top of the cosmic hierarchy, and that the world itself is lacking in the extraordinary capacities that human beings have for meaning and purpose and so forth, as Gregory Bateson said, if you model yourself on that particular posture, you have a snowball's chance in hell of surviving the future, because one is so well. It's like a classic Greek tragedy of hubris and fall, and I think that's basically one level of what we're going through. That doesn't solve the issue of, well, yes, maybe astrology affirms an intelligent, ensouled cosmos, but that doesn't make astrology valid. And so that's a separate issue. But if astrology can be shown to have validity through compelling correlations and so forth, then that's a game changer, as Kenny Ausable of the Bioneers likes to put it. It's a game changer. That's why he made this documentary series that Rachel and I were associated with recently, Changing of the Gods. So it's a matter of worldview to a great extent.
Rachel, as you heard Rick describe our situation and the role of astrology in our current crisis, what would you add to that?
Yeah, well, I think what Rick said, absolutely, I love it. It's beautiful. And what I would add is that, I think one of the values of astrology is that it really gives us a unified worldview. So kind of piggybacking on what Rick said, in esoteric astrology, we were talking about this yesterday, Alice Bailey describes that the whole universe is one collective psyche, and that we're all a part of that. And we can put this, in astrology, we have the saying "as above, so below," which is a hermetic part of the hermetic concept and text. And we can even look at this in, like, I like to look at the way that we're related to the universe and the way that we're related to the planets and the stars and the motion of the heavenly bodies and even other galaxies and other anything that we can see, any light that comes into our atmosphere, we're connected to. And one way that I like to kind of relate that, to put it into really practical terms, is the human body. We have all of these millions of microorganisms that exist in our gut that we don't see. We have every single body part is connected to everything else. So if you have a toothache up here, it's connected to a meridian that goes to your heart. So nothing in our physical bodies or physical symptoms can exist separate from the system, from the entirety of the system. And that's how I see us with astrology. And everything in our environment has an astrological correspondence. If you go out in your garden, you can look at every single plant has some kind of, relates to some kind of temperament, some kind of planetary ruler. And so when we open ourselves to understanding astrology, to incorporating it into our daily lives, we are connecting to the earth, to one another, to the stars, to everything in created reality. And that changes our relationship with power. You used the word polycrisis, and Elizabeth Schussler Fiorina is a theologian, and I can't remember what book I read this in, but she uses the concept of kyriarchy. She says, we're not in a patriarchal culture. We're in a kyriarchal culture structure, which is really like a hierarchical model of power. And this is what has been the prevailing paradigm for us. And we are at a point right now where Pluto, which is the planet that relates to power and power systems, where Pluto is getting ready to move into Aquarius in just next year. Actually, it starts making that ingress. And so all power structures are up for renewal and reinvention and rebirth. which means that over the next couple of years, because Pluto it goes into Aquarius next year, and then it retrogrades back into Capricorn, and then in 2024, it's fully in Aquarius for quite some time, and so we're going to be rethinking power, and I think that is going to be how we explore solutions for healing the planet, for healing one another. And I love another thing that Rick said, which was that that astrology just that astrology gives us an archetypal language to understand where we are and how we're relating to one another. And so I think that it can be really useful for bringing us back into relationship with our bodies, bringing us back into relationship with the earth, and really helping to find ways to develop solutions for some of the power structures that have been so out of balance, that have led to all of this, the crises that we see.
Thank you, Rachel. And Rick, in Cosmos and Psyche, you talk about the planetary conjunctions of the axial age. And you, if I understand correctly, you suggest that we may be approaching a similar period to that period 500 years ago. Do I have that right?
It's close to it. Just to clarify, what's called the axial era is the historical period in the first millennium BCE that brought about the sudden emergence in civilizations right across the world of enormous philosophical and religious kind of revolutions and revelations that gave birth to Buddhism, the Hinduism that we know coming out of the Upanishads and Bhagavad Gita, Judaism and the understanding of deity that came out of from the prophets, the Greek philosophers and so forth, Taoism, Confucianism in China. And this wave was something that particularly was the heart of that took place in the 6th century BCE, when Confucius and the Buddha and the first Greek philosophers like Pythagoras and Thales, the Hebrew prophets, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, 2nd Isaiah, etc. All these just at the same moment, more or less, lived, had their impact, and we are still in certain ways informed by the spiritual, cognitive transformations that took place at that time. And what's extraordinary, well, we were talking about Robert Bellah and his great book, Religion and Human Evolution, at the beginning here. And I just got done teaching a course at CIS graduate seminar on religion and human evolution, which is completely focused on the evolution that leads up to the axial era. It's an incredible book, as you know. And what's remarkable is that right in the 6th century BCE, there was a triple conjunction of the outer 3 planets that we know as Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. That happened. It's the only triple conjunction. They were all within 2 degrees of exact alignment. It's the only triple conjunction of those planets in recorded history. And what Cosmos and Psyche tracked out is that as you look through all the centuries of history, every time any 2 of those planets came into major conjunction or opposition, the axial alignments, as we call them, they coincided with extraordinary cultural transformations that are reflective of the archetypal meanings that astrologers came to, not on the basis of looking back at earlier centuries of these alignments, because we didn't have the computers and so forth to do so, but rather on the basis of, this is in the 19th and 20th century earlier, they came to the understanding of those meanings through studying birth charts and studying the transits of those planets to the birth charts. And then when we then traced back in history, when those planets came into major alignments, it's like the sequence of all the major the political social revolutions like the 1960s or the French Revolution, et cetera, coincided with the Uranus-Pluto cycle, while all the great spiritual awakenings, births of new religion and so forth, cultural renaissances took place under the Uranus-Neptune cycle. Well, there was this one time when all three of them converged, and that was in the 6th century BCE, and remarkably, all these historical trends converged at that time. Kind of had an axial moment, a seminal birthing of impulses that we're still working through. Now, so that was 2,500 years ago, and today we don't have this. We don't have the exact same alignments by any means. There's two things going on. But we are going through alignments right now. I won't go into all the technical details that are related to particularly what happened at the birth of the modern era 500 years ago, and which is a very major transformational shift in itself, needless to say. And this is an extraordinary opportunity, even though a whole era is dying, clearly, a whole identity is going through a kind of dying right now. But that is always necessary before a birth can take place, before the emergence of a new mode of consciousness, a new way of being in the world, et cetera. A new sense of identity, how we identify ourselves in relationship to the cosmos, to each other, et cetera, to the earth. So we're at a pivotal moment that has a great deal to do with what happened several hundred years ago at the birth of the modern, but in relationship to the first axial era. This picks up on a point that Thomas Berry and Ewart Cousins focused on, is, are we on the verge of a second axial era? And that argument, and in a sense, prophetic vision that they each were carrying, had to do with the idea that the first axial era brought forth all these religions and philosophies that developed crucial insights and moral and spiritual capacities that we still have with us now, but they each did it in kind of individuated ways, particular, going in their different directions, separate from each other. Also, there was a tendency towards the transcendent and leaving the immanent, putting the focus on liberation from the physical world, or getting beyond the world of sensory appearances and the prison of the body in favor of the soul, or a posthumous life with God after leaving this vale of tears, or this is a world of Maya versus the true reality, which is Brahman, and so forth. And so the idea of the second axial era is what Thomas Berry and your cousins framed for us to understand, that what's necessary now is, one, for all those different religious and philosophical movements and traditions to come into a relationship with each other, a dialogical relationship where they recognize that each one has absolutely valuable insights that the others need and that we need. But in addition, they said, besides this horizontal change from the original axial, first axial era, we also need a reconnection with the earth and with the great indigenous spiritual traditions that carried this recognition of the sacredness of the earth and our relationship to an earth community, rather than the human being is being exclusively the one that's made in God's image, and therefore we have a unique divine superiority over everything else. So they wanted both this kind of vertical reconnection to the earth and to the recognition of the importance of the primal indigenous spiritual traditions, wisdom traditions, but also this more this coming into a dialogical, multicultural, pluralistic recognition that no one system, no one religion, no one philosophy, including modern science, has nailed down the absolute final truth about reality, and that delusion that one of them is totally superior to all the rest is a part of our problem right now.
Thank you for correcting me on the axial age thing. And what I was conflating it with was what you mentioned about the turning point of the birth of the individual in this period of time, the 500-year thing. And you say this period is astrologically similar to that period at the birth of the individual and so forth. Is that correct?
Well, the emergence of a new level of individuation that particularly happened with modernity. Yes. I mean, individuality was nurtured all along.
But in terms of Thomas Berry's great vision of a new axial age, do you see astrological, if the axial age was in fact astrologically different from the present age, do you see astrological resonance for Berry's idea of a new axial age in the different astrological configuration that you're seeing now?
We're in a long-term process. No second axial age is going to emerge tomorrow, unless I'm happily mistaken.
Mm-hmm.
I remember Jung talking about how the kind of spiritual transformation and psychological transformation he saw at work was going to require centuries, and I'm sure that's true. But there's another factor that's come into the picture. I could go into the specific sequence of powerful world transits that we've been through over the last decade, and kind of climaxing in these last 2 or 3 years, that are very, let's just say, they tend to correlate with periods of tremendous crisis and transformation and breakdown of all old structures, and a kind of tension of opposites between the past and the future, really at coming into a tumultuous turning point that requires a great deal of courage and imagination to navigate our way through. That said,
excuse me, Rick, I think it would be useful if you actually referenced what those astrological configurations are.
Okay, sure. So we've just been through, this will be of interest to the people who are astrologically initiated here in the audience. So the Uranus-Pluto cycle, which our last conjunction of Uranus and Pluto, Uranus tends to coincide with or relate to the archetypal impulse for radical change, sudden, unexpected events. It's got a trickster quality to it, very creative, very rebellious, fast moving. It's a Promethean rebel against the old gods, liberating, an impulse for liberation, but also for disruption. Okay, so that is in alignment, that cycle, we have just been through the next major, what's called hard aspect alignment or dynamic alignment, the square between Uranus and Pluto, the first one since the 60s. And that took place between this square that we're just coming out of, took place roughly between about 2007 and 2020. And during that period, many things from, having a Black president elected, having, whether it's the Me Too movement, the Black Lives Matter movement, the Arab Spring, but also things like the Trump phenomenon, Trumpism, and the rise of dictator, authoritarian forces in the world. This all relates to the Uranus-Pluto combination, because Pluto relates, as Rachel said, to power, to the will to power, but it's also the deep evolutionary driving instinctual forces that inform all of nature and its constant death and rebirth cycles. And you get that kind of volcanic intensity combined with the Uranus Promethean change rebel creativity archetype. And it tends to be very volatile periods, also tremendous technological advance, but a lot of change that's very difficult to keep up with. So that was all happening. But just as it's ending, just as we get to like 2019, 2020, Saturn comes into the mix in conjunction with Pluto. And so we had a Saturn-Pluto conjunction, which is one of the most, that coincides with periods of great historical contractions. Like the last Saturn-Pluto opposition was when 9/11 and the invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan, war on terror, et cetera. Both world wars started under the Saturn-Pluto hard aspects, very tight alignments in both cases, 1914, 1939. The series of Cold War contractions all happen with that cycle, 1946 to 48 onwards. And so the COVID crisis, that pandemic was a huge thing, the greater sense of isolation, of dealing with death on a huge scale, confronting mortality. But then, as if those two weren't enough, Saturn also comes into the square to Uranus, and
that was last year.
That started last year. Even a bit in 2020, but particularly 2021, it comes in, and we're really cooking 2021 and 2022 with that Saturn square Uranus. Mm-hmm. And that's a period typically of great, I mentioned the conflict between past and future, the old and the new, also between conservative and progressive forces is very strong. A tendency for the status quo structures to suddenly be pushed to a breaking point. So there's kind of like crises that tend to happen, breakdown of infrastructures, and also the possibility of bringing all three of these alignments, of these cycles, of these archetypal combinations while they tend to coincide with challenging events, they also coincide with the potential for tremendously life-enhancing responses. For example, the Saturn-Uranus combination that we're in has a lot to do with basically the possibility of fundamentally restructuring society and restructuring our understanding of reality, for example, going through a crisis that involves the collapse of an old structure, but also I mean, the challenge is not to fall totally into throwing out the old and losing all constraints, but also not to get fixed in the status quo in a way which is going to eventually break. And so we have to solve that tension of opposites that Jung was always talking about. We have to hold that tension, be faithful to both sides in their best forms, and then by holding that, we can sometimes be, as Marie-Louise von Franz put it, we can sometimes be the vessel within which the divine brings forth a creative birth that comes out of those two opposing principles, those tendencies, the creative third, and you can't just construct it. It has to emerge with a kind of, it's a living birth that we don't quite know what form it's going to take, but it does. We do know what it takes from us, which is a lot of fortitude and discernment and imagination and compassion.
That's really helpful, Rick. I'm glad you took us into the specifics there. Rachel, you've been really reflecting on this. We've been talking about it. What would you add to what Rick has said here?
Well, I think first, before I add anything, I'd like to just take a step back for those who don't know astrology. And, we're talking a lot about these astrological cycles. And so I wanted to just kind of paint a broad brushstroke about astrological cycles. So with the planets are always moving, and they orbit around the sun, and we see them from our perspective here on Earth. And astrological cycles repeat themselves. So this is one of the beautiful things about astrology, is that we can look back at different times when these cycles have taken place, when two planets come together and form a new synodic cycle, when and anytime there's two planets are coming together, and particularly outer planets, which move slower, there is like a new chapter, a new storyline. And so I look at every astrological transit as a story. And what is happening? Where is the story going to take us? And so two planets coming together starts a new synodic cycle. And those two planets have their own meaning. The symbolism of astrology, each planetary symbol has so many different layers of meaning and layers of context. And so we can see themes that play out from the past, and that informs us for what's happening right now and what's happening in the future. And so within every synodic cycle, we see symbolically represented the challenges of that cycle and the opportunities and the possibilities, because every outer planet has evolutionary themes. It has soul growth themes. And we can see this in our personal lives when we go through outer planet transits, which can last up to 2-3 years. Big shifts that are taking place in our lives, but we can also see that in the world and see that happening on a global stage. And so it's, in 2020, we had 3 different synodic cycles. We had Pluto and Saturn, as Rick mentioned, coming together. And Pluto is power. Pluto is also the cycles of regeneration and death and rebirth. It's the breaking down of the old and the restructuring of the new. And Saturn being those structures, being the structures of what limiting beliefs do we hold as a culture, and how are we going to reshape those? Actually, it manifested literally. This is what's so cool about astrology, is that we saw statues being taken down. And statues, Saturn is very concrete in its meaning and its symbolism. And so we saw laws being restructured. We saw, the criminal justice system being re-explored with the legalization of marijuana, and a real hard look at the war on drugs. And so we saw a lot of that, like Saturn and Pluto coming together shows us what needs to break down and what needs to be restructured. And then we had Pluto and Jupiter coming together. And Jupiter is our faith. So Saturn and Jupiter both represent the collective ideas and how they play out in our personal lives and families and relationships. And then we also had Saturn and Jupiter coming together. So we had a lot of these really big new beginnings. And we are now in the process of building back better, reestablishing our sense of what we want moving forward. And so I think, Rick mentioned that this is the time for collective imagination. And it really is, because we know the symbolism of these planets. We know every transit represents a spectrum of possibilities. And so when we can read the symbolism, know the symbolism, we can look at what possibilities we want to create and come together to do that.
Rachel and Rick, you both know this. I wouldn't be in this inquiry into astrology if a good friend hadn't given me a reading with Rachel, and I had such a powerful time with it that we began talking. And so for me, astrology has been a real struggle in this sense. I've spent my life on frontiers of knowledge in mind, body health, environmental health, and sort of the nature of the universe. And I've said to both of you, I can totally understand psi phenomena like telepathy and clairvoyance and things like that. I can absolutely get the reality of UFOs. I've spent years looking at Enneagram now, and I think it's an extraordinarily descriptive character system. There are many things that are easy for me to understand. I get tarot. I get the I Ching. I get the incredible power of these symbolic structures. And as Jung said, they're often signs as well as symbols. But the idea that, I totally get that astrology is an incredibly rich symbol structure. And it's a structure of incredible stories that we've been curating, memes that we've been curating for thousands of years for their power. And so when you ask for a reading and are prepared to hear something that will have meaning, and somebody gives you one of these incredibly powerful stories, it catalyzes between us. Oh, yes, that's me. That makes sense. And so it's in that way, it's like an I Ching reading or a tarot reading, which at least theoretically are random. I mean, not that they are random. Maybe the universe is in fact constellating them, but theoretically they're random. So if I look at astrology that way, which to me finds some support in the fact that different astrological traditions give you different readings. So whether it's the Western tradition or the Vedic tradition or other traditions, past and present, they don't all say exactly the same thing. So the idea, number one, that I should give more veridical power to the specific powerful archetypes that are tied to my birthday, number one. And number two, that I should privilege Western psychology above Vedic, Western astrology above Vedic, or above other astrologies that have existed. Why should I believe that this particular large branch of astrology connects more deeply than all the others? So then when I get to an incredible book like Cosmos and Psyche, or the equally incredible and important book, which I think is important to understand Cosmos and Psyche, Rick and Sean Kelly's book, Psyche Unbound, Essays in Honor of Stanislav Grof, which tell us that the psychedelic research that Grof did, Rick and Stan Grof discovered that it correlated the nature of the experience that different people had correlated with the transits that they were going through. So those two things remain mind-boggling to me. And I can easily accept them as a cultural anthropologist just of the sheer beauty of the system if I'm not looking for its veridical value. But if I'm looking for its veridical value, I'm still challenged in creative ways. I think it's taking me deeper. It's taking me into a mystery that I don't understand. Now, this morning, I looked again at Cosmos and Psyche, and I found some beautiful passages that are helping me move in that direction. But I'm still challenged as we talk. And Rick, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
These are great questions to have, Michael, and they're certainly ones that Stan Grof and I faced when we first encountered the evidence, because it while we knew that Jung took astrology very seriously and we had a lot of respect for Jung, we didn't know that much about how he had explored it. And even though we were at Esalen, which is this is the 1970s, and it was very much a center of incredible range of different ways of understanding the world and different practices, ancient and modern, shamanic and scientific and so forth. But astrology was kind of the last paradigm that we took seriously for similar reasons to what you're talking about. It's one thing to get a tarot reading or the I Ching. There you can see it in terms of a kind of synchronistic divinatory process. But astrology, as Jung put it, could be understood as like synchronicity on a vast cosmic scale that is constantly ongoing. That's a whole nother ballgame. And the first step was to, Stan said, well, if we don't think of it in terms of the planets causing things to happen in a kind of Newtonian, Cartesian, mechanistic, linear causal form, but rather that the cosmos is panpsychic, as many philosophers are and even scientists are coming to recognize, and that meaning and purpose are go right through and through the entire system. Cosmos and Psyche, above and below, human, etc. That gets us, if we move into this more, this idea of, as Plotinus put it, it's not that the planets are causing things to happen, it's that they are symbolic of the deeper archetypal dynamics that are happening within the soul of the cosmos. And as he put it, the world is full of signs and symbols, and everything is interconnected. And then he said, everything breathes together. And I think that's a beautiful understanding of it. Everything's breathing together. Now, but that doesn't solve the problem of, well, why the kind of astrology that has incorporated the outer planets, that has the Western astrological tradition with its connection to Greco-Roman mythology and the names of the planets that the astronomers have given, et cetera. And I think the key to that is, first of all, recognizing that the cosmos is so richly meaningful through and through that no one interpretive system is, or symbol system, has the last word, and that there are multiple entrees into this mystery, and that they can be seen basically as different languages. The three of us here are speaking English. And English is spectacularly helpful for us here and those listening to us in conveying all sorts of meanings and nuances and multidimensional understandings and so forth. But you could say, well, we're privileging it and using it, but above other languages, but we're not doing so in a way that is intrinsically denying potential value to Sanskrit or Spanish or Mandarin or German. And it's by the way, Vedic and Western astrology are deeply related. I mean, they share those symbols. Are the planetary meanings are very much shared. So Vedic, up until recently, hadn't integrated the outer planets, but the differences between Vedic and, because they have a common origin about 2,200 years ago or so, but the difference between Vedic and Western astrology has a great deal to do with the cultural context within which it developed and evolved. And we see that in the difference between the Indian sense of personal identity versus typical Western sense of personal identity and so forth. That, just as every language is shaped by the cultural evolution that it's embedded in, so is that true of every astrological tradition. So I think it's helpful to see that we are, the archetypes are transcultural. They can manifest in different ways in every different culture, but they still are faithful to their essence. This is what mythologists always talk about in terms, like Joseph Campbell, the hero with 1,000 faces, or there's a goddess with 1,000 faces. The Aphrodite principle takes one form in Hawaii and another form in Greece. The Promethean trickster is different. It takes one embodiment in Africa, but is also present in Navajo traditions and so forth. So these archetypes are transcultural, but they are inflected in through different cultural mythologies in different ways. And so Western astrology has developed certain capacities, partly through its own mythic traditions, partly through its psychological and cultural developments that allow us to see, perceive, discern symbolic realities in a way that many astrologers of considerable intelligence find a lot of very, very valuable. It's not that this tradition exhausts all possible meanings. There's many ways in which the universe speaks to us, but each of us is a flowering of the universe, and we each have an original relationship to the universe, as Emerson said, and we in cultivating our particular path, our particular language, our particular practices and interpretive traditions, keeping open to others and being enriched by others, but at the same time being faithful to our own flowering. I mean, we are the cosmos, each of us as an individual, and each culture is a flowering of the cosmos. So we each have a potential authentic participation in that divine mystery, and we each can become a vessel of the self-revelation of the universe and of the anima mundi, the world soul, through each of us.
That's beautiful. Rachel, what are your reflections on?
I love that. I just want to take in those words for a minute. And the blossoming, like how we are each the blossoming of really the potentiality of our charts. And our charts are a snapshot of what was happening in the universe at the moment of our birth. And so I'm loving this conversation. I want to add a couple things. And first of all, I think the field of quantum physics, it really kind of gives us a new framework for understanding astrology. And I've mentioned in the last couple of conversations, I'm not a physicist, so this is an area that I'm going to stay in my lane. I'm an astrologer. But one of the things that's so fascinating to me about it is the way that we can see that we have that all atoms have parallels, and they're in correlated pairs. And so if we think about the Big Bang, that moment when our solar system was formed, we are all carrying that moment, stardust, in our bodies, in our systems. And so how we don't have the science yet to understand the ways in which we're connected to everything in the earth, and the ways in which, I mean, what's so amazing about astrology is that you can look at a certain transit that's happening and see potential health challenges that are manifesting in your physical body. And so this is something I've thought a lot about, and also thinking about fate and free will and some of those things, like how much do we have agency over what happens in our lives. And I think that that knowing astrology and understanding this language gives us an ability to really be conscious about what changes we're making and what's happening in our lives. There's one other thing I wanted to bring into this conversation too, and that is the sacredness of mathematics, harmony, the principles of harmonics that underlie so much of what we understand about astrological transits and the relationship of the planets. And I once heard a lecture in Italy. I was speaking at a conference there, and I heard it was a woman who's a physicist, and she was talking about how it was theorized that the ancient Babylonians could predict with certainty the movement of the planets, because they could relate the motion of the planets to the songs that they were singing. And I think the study of astrology shows us there is this sacred geometry, the sacred mathematics that works with light. Because when we're talking about astrology, we're talking about the interplay of light. And the most dramatic interplay of light that we see is the lunation cycle. But that's happening with all planets and with the Earth all the time. And so I think that that's another way that we can understand, even if we don't have the science to back it up. I think that there's something there with the way light works in our physical bodies and light works with the Earth.
Yes, Rachel, I agree that quantum physics and just what we're beginning to understand about the physics of the universe really does resonate with a lot of the things we're talking about, and also sacred mathematics. I have a friend and colleague, Walter Murch, who's a filmmaker, but he's written about the sort of renewal of Bodhi's law, which is about the harmony of the spheres, and actually has there's a book about his work that you can actually listen to the sound that the different planets make, so there's much richness in both of those comments. Rick, I first read Passion of the Western Mind again, and then Cosmos and Psyche, but then I ordered your extraordinary book, Psyche Unbound, the Essays in Honor of Stanislav Grof. And as somebody who was kind of schooled in political philosophy, Kira just put up my conversation with Walter Murch there. And by the way, friends, if you want to ask questions, please do put them in the chat. We'll try to get to them. But I had the feeling, as somebody who studied political philosophy for a long time, one of the things that's true, and I think in almost all ages, is the danger of telling the truth in public. This is well known, and in ancient times, you could easily get killed for it. Now you get crucified on the internet or whatever. You can still get killed in many parts of the world. But what a lot of political philosophers or philosophers have done, or scientists, is they've hidden parts of their findings in ways in plain sight. So I wondered, when you wrote Cosmos and Psyche, whether in some ways you restrained yourself and then published Psyche Unbound separately, because I understood Cosmos and Psyche better by reading Psyche Unbound. And because Psyche Unbound was about the LSD research and Stan Grof's seminal work, and you basically argue that in addition to the Royal Road of Dreams that Freud and Jung brought to the unconscious, that Grof, through his psychedelic research, had opened up a whole new and incredibly important form of access to the unconscious, to the whole Jungian tradition, and that the systematic nature of his research, both on the transits, but more specifically, all of his work on the birth trauma and its key role, and the different layers of the unconscious that people on LSD went through, that this was incredibly important to the history of psychology, the study of the unconscious, but also to your cosmic speculation. So the last addendum I want to put under there are many fascinating essays in here, but there's an essay by John Buchanan on Grof and Alfred North Whitehead, making the argument that Grof and Whitehead shared a similar cosmology. And I know that our mutual friend Rupert Sheldrake lectures on Whitehead, and so I haven't looked into that in depth, but I wanted to ask you, how central to your own understanding of Grof is the Whitehead essay, and how seriously do you take Whitehead as a kind of a philosophical, credible bridge to the new cosmology?
Yeah, I take Whitehead very, very seriously. He's a major pillar of the philosophy, cosmology, and consciousness program at our at CIS where I teach. And actually, the person who's been kind of Rupert Sheldrake's mentor with Whitehead is Matt Siegel, who teaches in the philosophy, cosmology, and consciousness program. And he's actually, besides connecting Sheldrakean morphic fields and his whole understanding with Whitehead's philosophy, not only has he done that, but Matt Siegel is also connecting it, the Whiteheadian process philosophy, because he works closely with John Cobb and that the process philosophy world. He also has connected it to the psychedelic research, as does John Buchanan. We all know each other and have worked with each other over the years. For those who are interested in Matt Siegel's extraordinary work, it's Segall, and his wonderful website is called Footnotes to Plato. Footnotes and then 2 as a numeral, and then Plato, .com. And he actually, I'm sure you know what he's picking up on. Footnotes to Plato is the excerpt of the quotation by Whitehead, where he said, Alfred North Whitehead says that it would not be an exaggeration to say that the entire history of Western philosophy is a series of footnotes to Plato.
Yes, I knew that quote.
Yeah, it's a famous. So that's the website's name. And in terms of Rachel's point about quantum physics, those who are interested, Will Keepan, who is a quantum physicist as well as an activist in gender healing, he does a marvelous exploration or explanation in terms of the connections with David Bohm's work of astrology with David Bohm's work with quantum physics, and it's chaos theory and so forth, and it's in the 10th episode of Changing of the Gods, the series, that documentary series that's about to come out in a month, I think, on the different streaming services. Changing of the Gods. Your direct question to me, Michael, about was I holding something back? Was I doing the classic Pythagorean, keep certain things secret, until the time is ripe or whatever, lest I get killed or booed off the stage or whatever? That was Copernicus's line, booed off the stage. He held back for 30 years with the heliocentric theory publication. And one always has to gauge the moment and the audience, et cetera. So I decided to publish Passion of the Western Mind first, and spent a decade writing that, because it would be like a history of Western thought that I wanted to be able to set out, like, where did we get the idea of archetypes? How did Plato's view of archetypes evolve to Jung's view? What happened? How did we move into a disenchanted cosmos in the course of the modern period? That became it became a text that's used in a lot of universities, but it was a kind of Trojan horse in terms of, I ultimately had in mind that was just going to be the intro to Cosmos and Psyche. Now the question is, well, why did I do Cosmos and Psyche focused on the big historical world transit, historical correlations, rather than on the psychedelic correlations, which was the origin of the kind of astrological breakthrough for Stan and me? And Stan definitely was wanting me to bring what's now in Psyche Unbound, that essay. He wanted me to publish a book on that back in the 70s. But I felt the time wasn't right then, because people could, well, even Stan recognized that psychedelics were already, LSD and psychedelics at that point were as controversial as anything, except for maybe astrology. And so to use astrology or psychedelics to reinforce each other was not a winning proposition at that point. We're in a different place right now. This psychedelic renaissance is taking place. Thank God it got delayed 50 years. Thank God that it's happening now, because for 50 years it was tragically delayed by ignorance and fear and so forth. And so we're in a different place where the value of psychedelic therapy is widely recognized, through helping veterans with MDMA assisted therapy for PTSD, or ketamine for depression, and all sorts of things. It's a new world, and so I felt more at ease in showing my hand. Okay, it goes back to the psychedelic research. That's when we first noticed the correlations and the power of astrology. As Stan said, astrology's turned out to be a Rosetta Stone of the human psyche, much to our shock, because it's as controversial as psychedelics. But we weren't going in that direction. But a lot of times, spiritual mysteries hide in the most obvious places. And we don't see them, just like we don't see the stars during the day, because the sun of SUN, the sun of the solar reason, rationality, blots out the deeper multiplex mystery of the night sky, of the soul of the cosmos, and that coming together of night and day, of sun and moon, is kind of what it's all about right now.
That's very helpful to me, Rick, because I didn't know the whole story. I'm amazed that you could plan that far in advance for all 3 volumes. So that speaks volumes for your ability to think this out. But indeed, for those who enjoy Cosmos and Psyche, I would commend this book of essays, Psyche Unbound, because I think it's very helpful.
There's
Rachel,
great essays in there also by Joseph Campbell and Houston
yeah.
Smith and Fritjof Capra and so forth. That's a
fabulous collection. Rachel, at one point in Cosmos and Psyche, Rick talks about how the ancients figured this out in the first place. And his line is something like, by some combination of empirical study and divination. Mm-hmm. Right? Now, you are not only an extremely gifted astrologer, but you are a psychic, an intuitive, beyond simply intuitive, a psychic. And you have had that gift most of your life. When you do astrological readings, is your psychic eye continuously engaged with the process? In other words, you helped me download some software that now I can do charts, and what I look at when I look at the software, there are like a zillion different interpretations, and they all go in different directions, right? Mm-hmm. So one of the conversations you and I have had is, of these 20 or 30 different correlations, relationships, which are the ones that you select out, Mm-hmm. So I can imagine that anybody who was intuitive and connected with the person they were reading for might use intuition to help select. But if one is psychic as well as intuitive, that raises the question of whether the psychic eye is engaged for you when you're doing a reading. And I've never quite asked you that. I'm curious about it.
Yeah, that's a good question. One of my early mentors, he was so adamant, I am not intuitive, I am mathematical. This is what, and this is why I do astrology. And I think, because astrology is a language of symbols, and symbols, as Rick so eloquently writes, they're multivalent. They're complex. They give us a whole range of meaning. And so you don't have to be psychic or intuitive to look at keywords, the keywords associated with the different planets and the different signs and the different houses and aspects. You can kind of, anyone can do this. I have a hard time separating my my mathematical astrology brain from my intuitive psychic brain, because I started developing both. I started really learning and studying astrology while I was going, learning under the spiritualist tradition, mediumship and channeling and esoteric studies, and getting into Hermeticism and so I really I saw them both as one, as they formed together inside of my own psyche. And so when I look at a chart, I can feel into what's the juicy stuff. What is the thing that you're working on right now? But even if I weren't able to do that, I could look at what transits you have going on. So transits being the planets in the heavens today and how they aspect your natal chart. Or I could look at progressions, which are a way that we advance the chart. And again, astrology cycles. So your natal chart shows a template for like the starting point. And all transits and all astrological cycles activate points in your natal chart. And the way that they activate them are going to be very similar to previous cycles in your life. Let's look at Saturn, for example. So Saturn is a 29-year cycle. Every 7 years, Saturn applies a hard aspect, so a square, conjunction, or an opposition to your natal Saturn. And at 7 years old, you're developing your sense of self, understanding rules and limits, and learning and figuring out, what am I good at? Your ego structure is coming together. And so every Saturn cycle after that first Saturn square presents themes of your 7-year-old self. So you get to be 14, 15 years old. And now it's like, I want to break free. I want to, evolve more into my adolescent self. And you still have to go back to that 7-year-old sense of yourself. And so that's one example of how it's really like literal. These astrological symbols play out very literally. So you don't have to know what those are. Now I can bring in my psychic awareness, but I could also and I don't know how to do it without bringing my psychic awareness, but that's more of like, that comes in with how do you heal, or, where do you go, or what possibilities is this going to open up?
I could add to what Rachel's saying, because I've thought about it a lot. Yvonne, my wife, she's a Jungian analyst and an astrologer, but she is quite intuitive, and I think, like Rachel, I think, first of all, astrology, the practice of any profound symbol system, and helps develop one's intuition, one's intuitive capacities. That's just it. It just comes with the practice. But then there are people who have an unusual kind of psychic porousness, an ability. You talked about it at the beginning, Michael, about your openness to recognizing how psi phenomena and telepathy, clairvoyance are real. And some people have that gift more than many average astrologers or even excellent astrologers. And what happens, I think, when a person has both the astrological practice and knowledge and the psychic ability, is that, first of all, that out of the multivalent range of possibilities that a particular transit or natal aspect can, as an astrologer, can give rise to this kind of rainbow spectrum of possible ways in which those archetypes can come through. And the psychic component comes in and says, I think my sense is that it's in this part of the spectrum that the symbolic, that the archetypes are going to come through. This is my sense. And they don't even have to be conscious, or Rachel doesn't even have to be conscious, like, okay, now my psychic ability is kicking in. It just speaks to her as she's looking at the transit, as she's looking at the natal aspect. It's the thing that intuitively comes to mind. It happens to all of us, even the less psychically gifted. When I'm giving a lecture, I'll give an example that'll just come to mind, and so often a person in the audience will say, I was just thinking of that, and then you said it. Well, I think there's a field that we're unconsciously in touch with all the time, and you don't have to be conscious of psychic powers to be picking up signals from your audience or from the person you're talking to, as what out of this range of symbolic possibilities that I'm seeing here is most relevant to this person. So that's one way in which I could see the two working together.
That's really helpful. I really want to thank you both. Let me just start there. I was saying to Rick, and Rachel certainly knows this, that I had no expectation I would be looking into astrology. It was not on my list of things to do. And then I did this reading with Rachel, and we did her spiritual biography and the conversation with her, and then the conversation with her and Yvonne, now the one with you. And Caroline Casey, is who you know and admires you greatly, is going to do the next one with us. And because it has been challenging for me for all the reasons that we've described, what I noticed in holding the tension about how this works was that I was being taken deeper into the mystery just by holding the tension, and I began to have dreams about it. And last night, I mentioned this to Rick before we came on. I had a dream in which two friends of mine, a woman in Bolinas named Hawk Weston, and a friend of mine who started Healthcare Without Harm with us called Gary Cohen. And I was trying to figure out how I could acquire or ensure in perpetuity a crystalline cave that was going down into the earth. That was the dream that I had last night. And I have no question in my mind that that was about this conversation today, you know. Mm-hmm. And the cave was very precious. Now, the Fat Kohen, which, you know, is priest in the Hebrew tradition, and then there's this resonance to the field that was purchased, you know, for a burial site in the Hebrew Bible. But I just have no question about that. And then the other piece for me that just came into focus was, for years I had looked for a gravestone for us because I wanted to pick out my own gravestone. And there's a stonemason's yard on my way out to Commonweal where I often stopped and looked. And about 8 months ago, I finally found it. And it was this almost spherical piece of black granite that weighs almost a ton that I managed to get transferred to our gravesite in Bolinas. And now when my wife and I go for, you know, lunch or something, we'll often stop at our gravesite and hang out with our stone. But what I realized, and I only realized it after I had the dream, it's so obvious, after I had the dream about the cave, the crystalline cave, is that this gravestone is a perfect iconic representation of a planet, right?
Wow.
It's a planet. It's a little microplanet. And so there are all these resonances that even as I struggle with the questions, and I'm very comfortable with my cultural anthropology being that just marvels at the unbelievable richness of this symbol system, right? And Rick, actually, you come toward it when you say, you know, that the Vedic and the Western astrologies are actually quite close. And then you say by some combination of divination and empirical observation. But if we were to expand that field into all the different astrological configurations that people have had over time, you know, they're not all closely correlated, right? There are many different ones, I guess I'd say.
Right, because they had different knowledge of, you know, a lot of them just hadn't even distinguished which the planets from each other. You know? Yeah.
So I think where I find myself with immense gratitude to you both is that it's important to me to stay honest with the questions, you know, not to prematurely sink into complete acceptance. And yet, as I sit with the questions and they keep bringing me deeper, more and more is revealed. Let me just put it that way. And you beautifully said, Rick, that in some way we don't choose astrology, that astrology is a kind of an eruption in our lives, or it comes to us.
It's a visitation, right? It's a goddess chooses to come into your life rather than the other way around.
So, Rachel, your last words.
Yeah, your dream. I just want to talk about your dream for a second.
Yeah.
So the going into this deep cave.
Yeah.
One of the beautiful insights that I'm having right now through our conversation, Rick, you talked about how, you know, spirituality and the worldview has all been about transcendence up and out of the body and out of the human experience into the divine, which is considered to be separate from ourselves. And so it's kind of like an as above, so below, sort of like as above detached from so below. And I think what astrology is doing right now at this time in our history is it's saying that which is above, let's bring it down below. And so it's giving us the ability to embody our connection with the divine in a way that we haven't for centuries. And I had this insight when I was studying Buddhism, Tantric Buddhism in theology school, that the new form of transcendence, that we were all moving into this new paradigm of transcendence through the heart, transcendence through the body, that you could access mystical experiences in the physical form. And so I think that that's where we're moving, and that's one of the gifts that astrology can offer us, is bringing the heavens down here to the earth.
Thank you, Rachel. Rick, final thoughts.
I'm grateful that your own spiritual quest, and staying true to your intellectual values and convictions, and at the same time being ready to risk them at the paradigm boundary line, and with the possibility of opening up a new horizon, is really admirable. And I'm glad Rachel provided the kind of very necessary initiatory experience for you that kind of has opened up a path that in some ways I think you're a model of what I think many will be probably going through as we open up to the fact that there are more things in heaven and earth than were dreamt of in our previous philosophy.
So true. Well, Rachel Lang, Rick Tarnas, thank you both beyond words for being with us. And Rick, how fitting that we come back together 15 years later to have a conversation about Cosmos and Psyche again. One of the first ones we did with the New School with you, and now 15 years later. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And just one more reminder, if anyone has not seen Changing of the Gods, it is a stunning documentary series. And Rick, it's so brilliant. And what you've done for astrology and for the world is incredible. So thank you for all of your dedication, all of your wisdom, and for sharing it with us all.
Well, that's very kind of you, Rachel. Thank you.
All right. Take care.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Don't take it, 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 don't take it,
The river is a healer, the river is a sage. The river knows no end, and the river feels no way.